The man hit the pavement outside Harrow General Hospital in Duskfield, Oregon at 6:47 in the evening, and he hit it hard. Chest first, one hand clawing at the concrete like he was trying to drag himself somewhere. Blood had soaked through his jacket so completely that the fabric had gone stiff. A parking attendant saw him first and started screaming. 3 nurses ran out from the sliding doors, dropped to their knees beside him, and that's when he grabbed the closest one by the wrist with a grip that should not have been possible for a man losing that much blood. His lips moved. They had to put their ears 6 inches from his mouth to hear it. Find Dawson. Get me Nurse Dawson. The nurses looked at each other. 31 minutes earlier, Nurse Lena Dawson had been escorted out of this very building with a cardboard box under one arm and a security guard at her shoulder. Terminated, badge surrendered, reputation torched, because she'd had the nerve to contradict the wrong surgeon in front of the wrong audience. Nobody outside those ER doors knew yet that the dying man on the concrete had just asked for the only person in Duskfield who could actually keep him alive. Before we go further, if you're watching this story unfold and you want to see where it ends, follow along, hit like, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The argument had started over a dosage. That was the part nobody would remember correctly later. They'd remember the shouting, the crowd of residents that had gathered in the hallway, the way Chief Surgeon Dr. Roland Voss had gone so still and cold when Lena Dawson contradicted him that the nurses nearest the door had quietly stepped back. But it had started over a number, a milligram count on a post-op pain management order that Lena had looked at 3 times because she couldn't believe what she was reading. The patient was a 63-year-old man named Gerald Oates, recovering from a partial bowel resection, and he had a documented, flagged, unmissable note in his chart indicating a severe sensitivity to opioid-based analgesics, a sensitivity that had caused respiratory distress during a previous hospitalization 8 years ago, a hospitalization that had ended with 3 days in the ICU, and a notation that should have made every prescribing physician at Harrow General pause before putting a pen to paper. Voss had not paused. Lena had been doing her end-of-shift medication check when she pulled Oates's chart. Not because anything had alarmed her, just routine, the kind of careful pass-through she did at the end of every shift because she'd learned, through experience and through things she didn't talk about, that the moment you stopped checking was the moment something slipped through. She saw the order. She read it twice. Then she walked down the hall to the nursing station, picked up the internal phone, and paged Dr. Voss. He didn't call back for 11 minutes. When he did, she explained what she'd found, calmly, without accusation. Just the facts laid out in sequence. The chart flag, the order, the potential interaction. There was a pause on the line. I'm aware of the patient's history, Ms. Dawson. Then you're aware that the dosage you've ordered is 3 times what the flag recommends as a maximum ceiling. Another pause, longer this time. I've reassessed the risk profile. The order stands. Lena held the phone for a moment. Dr. Voss, if we administer this tonight and his respiratory system responds the way it did in 2016, we are looking at acute. I said the order stands. The line went dead. She stood at the nursing station for 60 seconds, very still, working through it. She'd been a nurse at Harrow General for 4 years. Before that, she'd spent 9 years in places that were not on any tourist map, doing things that did not appear on the official version of her service record. She knew how to follow a chain of command. She also knew, with the kind of bone-deep certainty that didn't require a second opinion, that if she walked into Gerald Oates's room and administered what was on that chart, she might be walking back out to call his family. She went back to the nursing station and filed a formal medication concern report through the electronic system, time-stamped, documented, attached to Oates's chart. Then she walked to Gerald Oates's room, introduced herself, checked his vitals, and sat down in the chair beside his bed to explain, in plain language, what she had found and what she had done about it. He was a quiet man, retired electrician, wife waiting at home. He listened to her without interrupting. What happens now? He asked. Right now, the order is on hold pending review. If it gets released without modification, I'll escalate. He looked at her for a moment. You think they'll listen? She didn't answer that directly. I'm going to make sure you're protected tonight, Mr. Oates. That's my job. She went back out into the hall and ran directly into Roland Voss. He was not alone. He had two residents flanking him and the charge nurse supervisor, Patricia Helms, a half step behind, which told Lena that someone had already called ahead, that this had already been arranged before Voss turned the corner, that the conversation she was about to have had been framed and decided before she opened her mouth. Voss stopped in front of her. He was tall, silver-haired, and wore the specific expression of a man who had never seriously considered that he might be wrong. "You put a hold on a physician's order," he said. "I filed a medication concern. Protocol allows—" "You went around me to a patient before coming to me directly." "I called you directly. 11 minutes before you called back. The hold was already filed." "Ms. Dawson." He stepped closer, not threatening exactly, but deliberately reducing the space between them. "You have been a disruptive presence in this department for 4 years. You second-guess clinical decisions that are above your scope. You undermine physician authority in front of patients and staff. And you have now, in a patient's room, created anxiety about a medication order that has been reviewed and cleared by the attending physician of record." The hallway had gone quiet. Lena was aware peripherally of faces. Residents, nurses, an orderly with a supply cart who had stopped moving. She kept her voice level. "The order hasn't been reviewed by anyone other than the physician who wrote it. The concern I filed is sitting in the system right now. If you're telling me that a single physician's self-review constitutes a cleared order when a documented allergy flag is attached to the chart, then I would like that confirmed in writing before I remove the hold." The silence in the hallway went from quiet to something else. The particular absence of sound that happens when a group of people are very carefully not reacting. Patricia Helms said softly, "Lena." "No." Voss held up one hand. "No. We're done with the conversation." He turned to Helms. "I want her pulled from the floor, tonight." Lena said, "Gerald Oates is still my patient until the end of shift." "Gerald Oates is no longer your patient." She looked at him for a long moment. "Something happens to him tonight because of that order. Every second of what I'm telling you right now is documented and time-stamped." Voss's jaw tightened. He didn't raise his voice. That, she'd learned, was how you knew when men like him were truly angry. They went quieter. "Go home, Ms. Dawson. You're done for the night." She didn't move for 3 seconds. Not out of defiance, exactly. More because she was running a fast calculation, weighing options, checking angles the way she'd been trained to check them. Then she said, quietly, "Make sure someone reads that flag before they administer anything tonight." And she walked back to the nursing station to get her things. Patricia Helms followed her. "He's going to take this to administration," Helms said, low enough that only Lena could hear. "I know. This isn't the first time, Lena. You know how many complaints he's filed." "I know." "He has the board's ear." Helms paused. If I had just let it go, we might have an intubated patient in the ICU by morning." Lena pulled her jacket from her locker. "I know what I did. I know why I did it. If that's grounds for termination, then at least the paperwork will be clean." She meant it as a professional statement. She didn't know, when she said it, that she'd be asked to prove it in less than 2 hours. Bien. The termination meeting was brief and brutal in the way that institutional brutality always is. Not loud, not dramatic, just a set of prepared words read from a document by someone who wouldn't meet her eyes. The HR director, a man named Curtis Waite, sat behind a desk with a folder open in front of him and recited the formal language while Voss stood to the side with his arms crossed. Insubordination, disruptive conduct, undermining physician authority, violation of the chain of command. "Is there anything you'd like to say?" Waite asked at the end. Lena sat with her hands folded on her knees. She'd heard language like this before, in other contexts, from other people who had the authority and the paperwork to do what they were doing. She'd learned, through hard experience, that the moment in the room wasn't the moment that mattered. The moment that mattered came later. "I'd like a copy of the signed termination document and all related paperwork, including the full text of the complaints filed against me." She paused. "Tonight, if possible." Waite looked surprised. Voss looked like he'd bitten something sour. "You'll receive copies within 5 business days, as per." "Tonight," she repeated, "or I'll request them through the State Nursing Board." The copies were on Waite's desk within 20 minutes. A security officer, a young guy named Devin, who had always been decent to her, walked her to the locker room to collect her things, and then to the front entrance. He offered to carry the box. She let him. At the sliding doors, he handed it back and looked like he wanted to say something. "You're going to be okay," he said finally. She gave him a small nod. "I know." The doors opened. The evening air hit her, cool, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. The parking lot lights were just starting to glow against the dimming sky. She had her car keys in her hand, the box under her arm, and a termination letter she'd already read twice tucked in the outside pocket of her bag. She was 41 years old. She had 2 Purple Hearts, a combat medical badge, and a commendation she was not allowed to discuss from an operation that officially hadn't happened. She had sutured wounds in the dark, triaged mass casualties under fire, kept men alive who had no business still being alive on paper. She had done it in places where the temperature alone could kill you, where the dust got into everything, where the margin between a correct decision and a catastrophic one was measured in seconds. And she had just been fired for reading a chart. She walked toward the parking lot without looking back. She was 20 feet from her car when the screaming started behind her. Not screaming exactly, shouting, the specific pitch of trained voices going loud under pressure, which was different from panic, though it lived right next to it. She stopped walking. Old instinct. Her head came up before her brain had finished deciding to do it. She turned. There was a figure on the pavement outside the ER entrance. She could see it from where she stood, the way the parking lot curved back around to the ambulance bay. People running, a nurse dropping to her knees. The automatic doors opening and not closing because someone had stuck a foot in them. She didn't move toward it. Not immediately. She stood there with her box and her car keys and told herself it wasn't her building anymore. Then she heard, even from that distance, or maybe she didn't hear it, maybe what she saw was the nurse crouching over the figure, turning to look at the woman standing in the parking lot, and the look on the nurse's face telling her everything. The name. Her name. She put the box down on the roof of the nearest car and walked back. By the time she reached the ER entrance, there were 4 staff members around the man on the pavement. He was face down. That was the first thing she cataloged. Position, because position told you things. He'd gone down forward, not sideways, which meant his legs had given before he could brace. His right hand was still trying to grip the concrete, respiratory pattern visible in his back, labored and shallow, but there. "Who is he?" she asked, crouching. The nurse nearest her, Amara, 2nd year, good instincts, looked up. "No ID, just walked in from the street. He was saying your name." "My name?" He said Dawson. He kept saying Dawson. Lena put 2 fingers on the side of his neck, pulse rapid, thready, the texture of it telling her his pressure was falling. She got her hands under his shoulder. "Help me roll him." They turned him. His face was unfamiliar, a man she'd never seen, mid-40s, heavy muscle under the jacket, the kind of build that came from years of physical work, not a gym. But the wound pattern across his torso, partially visible through the blood-soaked jacket she was opening, told her something immediate and specific. "Get me a gurney," she said. Not a question. "Ms. Dawson," Amara hesitated. "You've been—" "Get me a gurney right now." The gurney came. They loaded him. She walked with them through the doors, hands already working, her mind shifting into a register that felt, when it happened, like the rest of the world going quiet, and her own processing going loud. "Pressure?" she asked. 84/50 and dropping. "Oneg available?" "Yes." "Start it. 2 large bore IVs, both arms. I need a chest x-ray, abdominal ultrasound, and I need the trauma room, not Bay 3. Dr. Voss is the attending on call." She didn't slow down. "Tell Dr. Voss the patient was specifically asking for me by name and that I'm here as a clinical resource at patient request. If he wants to have a jurisdiction argument, he can have it in the hallway, and I'll document that too." Amara looked at her for half a second and then started moving. The trauma room had the specific smell of a room that had been well used, antiseptic and something underneath it that no amount of cleaning entirely removed. Lena snapped gloves on and moved to the patient's right side while 2 nurses moved to the left. The man had been stripped to the waist during transport, and what she was looking at now, under the blood, was not a random wound pattern. It was precise. 3 entry wounds, all on the right side of his torso, grouped in a way that spoke of controlled conditions and deliberate aim rather than a chaotic event. She'd seen this kind of wound distribution before. The memory was so specific it was almost physical. Different light, different air, different equipment, the same grouping. She pressed carefully along his abdomen. His eyes were half open, coming in and out of consciousness. But when her fingers reached the lower right quadrant and increased pressure, he made a sound. "Hold on," she said, to him directly, not the room. "I've got you." His eyes found her face. Something moved in them. Recognition, she thought, though she'd never seen this man before in her life. "Dawson," he said, barely audible. "Yeah, I'm here." "Stop talking, save your air." "Classified," he started. "Later. Right now, quiet." She continued her assessment. The ultrasound cart was being rolled in. She didn't wait for someone to operate it. She picked up the transducer herself, applied gel to his abdomen, and began moving it across the surface with the economy of someone who had done this without a cart, without proper equipment, in conditions that made this room look like a luxury. The image came up. She stared at it for 4 seconds. "He's got a hepatic laceration," she said. "Right lobe, grade 3, maybe 4. He's bleeding into the peritoneum." She set the transducer down. "We need to—" "That's enough." Roland Voss had come through the door. He was in his surgical gown, arms crossed, and his face carried the particular controlled anger of a man who had terminated someone 20 minutes ago and was now watching her conduct an assessment in his trauma room. "Ms. Dawson, you do not have clinical authority in this. Your patient has a grade 3 hepatic laceration, and his pressure is in free fall," she said without turning around. "You can escort me out again in 10 minutes. Right now, someone needs to book OR2. I will make the determination about, then make it." She stepped back from the table and looked at him directly. "Look at the ultrasound. Look at his pressure. You're the attending. Make the call." It was a calculated move. She gave it to him. Gave him the authority back, cleanly, no contest. Because she'd learned, over years, that the fastest way through a power argument with someone who cared more about the argument than the patient was to hand them the decision and let them make it. Either he made the right call, or he made the wrong one. Either way, it was on him. Voss looked at the ultrasound. A beat of silence. "Booker 2, he said to the room. "Already called," Amara said from the doorway. Voss looked at Lena. Something passed through his expression that was not gratitude and not acknowledgement. Closer to the very specific irritation of a man who has just been maneuvered into the correct position and knows it. "You're still not authorized to be in this room," he said. "I'll wait in the hall," she said, and she meant it. She was walking to the door when the man on the table grabbed her wrist. Not hard. He didn't have the strength for hard anymore. But there was intention in it, the kind of grip that comes from a person deciding to use what they have left. She stopped. "Don't go," he said. His voice was barely there. "Not yet." She looked back at Voss. Voss was looking at the man on the table, and something in his expression had shifted. Not softened exactly, but recalculated. Because the man on the table was clearly making a decision, even semi-conscious, and it was hard to look at that and keep thinking about jurisdiction. "Stay in the corner," Voss said finally, the words costing him something. "You are an observer. If I hear one more recommendation—" "Understood," she said. She stayed. He made it to the OR. That part went the way it needed to go. Voss was not a bad surgeon. She had never thought that. And the hepatic lac was caught in time. The bleeding controlled, the pressure brought back up by degrees to something that would sustain a person. Lena stood in the observation gallery and watched it happen. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know why he knew hers. At some point during the surgery, someone brought her a coffee and set it on the bench beside her without saying anything. She picked it up, drank it, and kept watching. When it was done and Voss came out of the OR, he paused at the gallery window before he pulled down his mask. He didn't look up at her. He looked at his hands in the way surgeons sometimes did after a case, not admiring them, more like checking that they'd done what he'd expected. Then he walked away. Lena sat in the observation gallery until someone came to tell her the patient was in recovery. Then she walked down to the recovery floor, stood outside the door of his room, and looked through the window at the man who had asked for her by name. He was unconscious, monitor steady, breathing on his own. She had no idea who he was. She was turning to leave when her phone, her personal cell, not a hospital pager, buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number. Oregon area code. But she didn't recognize the last 7 digits. She answered. The voice on the other end was calm and clipped and male, and it said 4 words before she could speak. Don't leave the hospital. She stood very still. Who is this? She said. A pause, then quieter. He told us to call you if something happened. That's all we can say right now. The line went dead. She stood in the hallway outside the recovery room with her phone in her hand, and for the first time that evening, something that was not professional resolve moved through her. Something older and more specific. The feeling of a situation clicking into a shape she had felt before, in places where the air was different and the stakes were absolute. She looked back through the window at the man in the recovery room. She put her phone in her pocket. She didn't leave. The hallway outside recovery was the kind of quiet that hospitals manufacture at night. Not real quiet, but managed quiet. The hum of equipment and the soft tread of overnight staff moving between rooms, the occasional beep from behind a closed door. Lena stood in it for a long moment after the call ended, her phone still warm in her hand, and did what she'd been trained to do when a situation outpaced her current information. She stopped trying to solve it and started cataloging what she actually knew. What she knew was this. A man she had never met had arrived at Harrow General with 3 gunshot wounds, asked for her by name, and survived surgery. Someone with her personal cell number had called within an hour of that man entering the building and told her not to leave. The voice had been calm, not threatening, the kind of calm that came from training, not temperament. She put the phone in her jacket pocket and sat down on a bench near the window at the end of the hall. Through the glass, the parking lot below was mostly empty now. A few cars under the sodium lights, a security patrol cart making its slow loop. Ordinary. She watched it and felt the gap between what was visible and what was actually happening widen in the particular way it did when she'd been in situations that started ordinary and then didn't stay that way. She'd been in enough of them to recognize the shape early. After 20 minutes, she walked back to the nurse's station on the recovery floor and asked if the unidentified patient had been assigned a room number. The nurse on duty, she didn't know him, younger, probably a travel nurse, checked his screen and said yes, room 412, but that visiting hours were, I'm the nurse who assessed him in the trauma bay, Lena said. I want to check his chart. You're not... The nurse looked at her badge clip, which was empty because she had handed her badge in, and then back at her face. Are you on staff here? Not currently, she said, and she kept her voice neutral enough that it didn't invite a follow-up. He looked uncertain. She gave him a moment to work through it, then said, Can you tell me who the attending is for post-op? Dr. Voss transferred him to Dr. Kara Sims for overnight coverage. Thank you. She turned and walked toward the elevator before he could say anything else. She pressed 4 and waited, arms crossed, watching the floor numbers change. Kara Sims was someone Lena knew. Not well, but enough. 40-something, internal medicine rotation, a pragmatist in the way that some night shift doctors became pragmatists. Not callous, but stripped of the excess, interested in what was actually happening in front of her, rather than what the situation was supposed to look like. They'd crossed paths a few times over the past 4 years, usually when Lena was the one escalating something that should have been escalated sooner by someone else. She found Sims at the nursing station on 4, reviewing something on a tablet, reading glasses pushed up into her hair. Dawson, Sims said without looking up. I heard you had an interesting night. I need 5 minutes with the patient in 412. Sims looked up then. She had the kind of eyes that processed information quickly and didn't waste time performing reactions. You know you're not on the schedule. I know. Curtis Waite called the floor supervisor 40 minutes ago and said if you were still in the building, someone should let security know. Lena waited. Sims set the tablet down. The patient has been asking for you since he came out of anesthesia. The word he keeps using is specifically, as in he specifically wants Nurse Dawson, specifically won't talk to anyone else, and specifically got agitated enough about it that we had to adjust his sedation level. She paused. So, 5 minutes. Thank you. Don't thank me. The second Voss finds out I let you in there, I'll be the one filing paperwork all week. She turned back to her tablet. Room's unlocked. In. He was more present than she'd expected, not fully alert. The anesthesia was still wearing off in stages, and the pain medication was doing its job. But when she stepped through the door and moved to the side of his bed, his eyes tracked to her immediately. Deliberate. "You stayed," he said. "Someone called me and told me to." Something crossed his face that might have been relief and might have been something else. "Reeves?" She didn't answer that because she didn't know who Reeves was. "Can you tell me your name?" A pause. "Marcus Holt." She said nothing, waiting to see if he'd add anything. "That's not classified," he said, and something in the way he said it suggested that a number of other things were. "You don't know me. I know that. But you saved my life 10 years ago." She looked at him carefully. "I don't remember you." "Kandahar, 2014, night operation. I was the third guy through the door." He stopped to breathe. The talking was costing him. "You had a tourniquet on my leg before the building was even clear." She did remember Kandahar. She did not remember a Marcus Holt, because in 2014, she had not known the names of most of the men she'd worked on. She'd known their blood types, their wound patterns, what she could do with what she had, and how much time she had to do it. The names came later sometimes, when the men tracked her down to say something. Most of them didn't. "Okay," she said. "I'm with a federal protection unit now. Civilian assignment, I can't go further than that. You came in with 3 gunshot wounds." "Yeah." He shifted slightly and his jaw tightened. "The operation I was running got compromised. Someone ahead of me in the chain of command has been feeding locations." He paused. "The people I was running an asset for, they need to know what happened. And the only person outside my unit I would trust to be in this building while this was happening was someone whose name I verified a long time ago." "You had my name in some kind of protocol?" "Emergency contact, unaffiliated. In case everything inside the unit went sideways, I needed someone outside it." He looked at her. "I knew you worked here. I made it to the door." She sat with that for a moment. The logic of it was sound. She understood the architecture of it, the way you built redundancies outside your immediate chain when you stopped fully trusting the chain. She'd done it herself once, in a situation she didn't discuss. "Who called me?" she asked. "Reeves. He's my backup contact. He's outside right now." "Outside the hospital?" "Parking lot, east side." Holt's eyes went to the window. "He would have come in, but he doesn't know who else in this building is connected to the people who shot me." The room was quiet for a moment. Through the door, she could hear the low sounds of the floor. Movement, monitors, the ordinary machinery of overnight care. "What do you need from me?" she said. He looked at her. "Right now? Just stay. Just be somewhere in this building that I can account for. Reeves will make contact when it's safe." He paused again. "And if something happens to me before morning, there's a drive in the left inside pocket of my jacket. Harrow General Property Desk. I logged it under a different name. You'll need to get it to Reeves." She didn't move immediately. She was thinking about Curtis Waite's call to the floor supervisor, about Voss's face in the trauma room, about the termination letter in her bag, about the parking lot outside and a car she hadn't yet driven home. "I don't work here anymore," she said. "I know." He met her eyes. "I'm not asking as a patient." She left his room and stood in the hallway and looked at her phone. 10:47 p.m. She had been in this building for, she calculated it, almost 4 hours past the moment she'd been walked out of it. She was tired in the specific way that came not from lack of sleep, but from the kind of sustained alertness that burned fuel differently, the kind she knew how to sustain but that had a cost you noticed later. She texted no one. She walked back to the nursing station, told Sims that Holt was more stable cognitively than the chart suggested, and then she went to the family waiting area on 4 and sat in a chair by the window and looked at the parking lot below until she found what she was looking for. East side. A dark-colored SUV, running lights off, parked in a spot that was angled slightly off from how normal people parked, the angle of a vehicle positioned for exit rather than for convenience. She couldn't see the driver from this height and distance, but the vehicle had been there since she arrived on the floor. She was sure of it. She had been sitting there for 18 minutes when the lights in the hallway flickered. Once, then twice, and then they went out. Not just the hallway, everything. The building went dark in the way that large buildings went dark when power was cut at the source. Not a gradual dimming, but an instant subtraction, the kind where the absence of light hit you physically before your brain had processed what happened. Emergency lighting kicked in after a 3-second delay. Pale, greenish, the battery-powered backup that existed exactly for this moment, casting the hallway in the kind of light that made people's faces look wrong. Somewhere on the floor below, someone screamed. Not a sustained scream, a sharp one, the kind that comes from surprise rather than injury, and then stopped. But behind it, coming up through the building like sound travels through bones, she could hear it beginning. Multiple voices, distant alarms, the overhead PA system trying to activate and catching on half power, releasing a burst of static. Lena was already out of the chair and moving. She hit the hallway at a controlled pace, not running, because running in a hospital during a blackout caused collisions and falls, but fast enough that she was at the nursing station in 12 seconds. Sims was already there, flashlight in hand, the backup desk panel lit in amber. "What is it?" Lena said. "Full building power loss. Generator should have kicked by now. It hasn't." Sims was reading the backup panel. "ER is reporting incoming. Mass casualty event. Some kind of industrial incident south of downtown. They need all hands." "How many incoming?" Sims looked at her. "First estimate is 30 plus. Possibly more." 30 patients in a blacked-out emergency department with a generator that wasn't running. Lena did the arithmetic in the time it took Sims to say the next sentence. "OR is on backup battery only, ICU is holding, but if the generator doesn't kick inside the ventilator-dependent patients," Lena said. 6 on this floor alone." Lena turned toward the supply room without being asked. "Where's your manual resuscitation stock?" "Second shelf, left side." "Dawson, I know I'm not on the schedule," she said, already pushing through the door. Scott. The next 40 minutes were the kind of 40 minutes that didn't have a narrative shape while you were inside them. They were just a sequence of immediate problems with immediate solutions that had to be found without the usual resources, and Lena moved through them the way she'd been taught to move through that kind of time. Not smoothly, because nothing was smooth, but continuously, without stopping, because stopping was the only thing that actually cost you. She moved between the 6 ventilator-dependent patients with 2 other nurses. Amara had come up from the floor below, out of breath, still in her earlier shift scrubs, manually bagging the ones whose machines had gone to battery power and checking the battery indicators on the ones that were still running, calculating how long each had before she'd need to intervene. She talked to patients while she worked because patients in the dark with compromised breathing were frightened even when they couldn't express it, and fear increased oxygen demand. And increased oxygen demand was the last thing any of them needed right now. An elderly woman in room 408 grabbed her arm and said, "Is it a storm?" "Power outage," Lena said, still watching the ventilator display. "You're okay. The machine is okay." "I'm right here." "I can't see anything." "I know, but I can." She squeezed the woman's hand once, precisely, and kept working. Downstairs, the ER was receiving patients. She could hear it. The pattern of sound from the floor below, the volume of it, the quality of it. And she knew without being there what it felt like down there right now. Too many people, not enough light, not enough staff. The specific kind of organized panic that experienced ER teams were good at managing until they were overwhelmed and then were suddenly bad at it all at once. At the 40-minute mark, the generator kicked. The lights came back in stages. Emergency lighting first, then the full overhead fluorescence, blinking on section by section like the building was remembering itself. The alarms that had been running on backup battery reset and went through their testing sequences, a brief cacophony that settled. The ventilators shifted back to main power with a sound like a collective exhale. Lena stood in room 408 and let herself take 3 seconds. The elderly woman looked up at her in the restored light. "Are you a doctor?" "Nurse," Lena said. "You're very calm." "You did well," Lena told her. "You stayed calm too. That was good." She went back to the hallway. Amara was at the nursing station, looking exhausted and relieved in the way you looked when a sustained thing had just ended and your body hadn't caught up with the fact that it was over. 40 minutes, Amara said. "Yeah." "How many of those patients did you bag manually?" 4, off and on. The other 2 held. Amara looked at her. She was 26, maybe 27, and she'd been running all night too. You know administration is going to find out you're still here. Probably already know. Curtis Waite came up to the third floor about 20 minutes into the blackout asking where you were. Someone told him you were on 4 managing the ventilator patients. Lena said nothing. He didn't say anything after that, Amar said. Just went back downstairs. There was a specific texture to information like that, the kind of silence from someone who had planned to say something and then encountered a fact that made the saying of it complicated. She filed it. How bad is the ER? She asked. Overwhelmed. Industrial chemical exposure, Southside Warehouse District. Some kind of solvent fire. The exposures are mostly respiratory. Irritant gas, they think. 41 patients so far, more coming. Lena looked at the elevator. Respiratory, irritant, mass exposure, an ER that was already understaffed on a normal night managing a building that had just spent 40 minutes on backup power. Does the ER have anyone handling decon protocol? She asked. Amara's expression answered before she did. She took the stairs. She wasn't sure why stairs felt more appropriate than the elevator in that moment. Habit, maybe. Or the fact that she'd been trained in environments where elevators were the thing that got you killed when the power went again. The ER on the ground floor was the kind of controlled chaos that looked, from the outside, like pure chaos. Gurneys in the hallway, staff moving fast between stations. A charge nurse Lena recognized. Older woman named Deborah, 30-plus years on the floor, the kind of unflappable you couldn't buy with experience alone, standing at the center of it all with a clipboard and a headset, directing traffic with the economy of someone who had done this before, in other versions, in other situations. Deborah saw Lena the moment she stepped off the stairs. Dawson. No surprise. Decon is a mess. Tell me you know the ToxChem protocol for solvent inhalation. Modified for mass exposure, yes. Base 6 through 10. I've got 4 nurses and none of them have run it before. I need someone who has. She handed her a clipboard without waiting for a response. Lena took it. She was aware, at the edge of her peripheral attention, that Roland Voss was somewhere in this room. She'd seen him moving toward the far end near the trauma bays, head down, working. He hadn't looked her direction. She didn't know if that was choice or circumstance, and she filed that too, under things that would matter later but didn't matter now. She moved to Bay 6. The patients were in various states of exposure, eyes streaming, some with audible wheeze in their breathing, a few more compromised, one on a non-rebreather already. She moved through them in sequence, talking as she went, asking the nurses to follow her pattern, explaining the reasoning behind each step in brief phrases, because if you explained the reasoning, people remembered the protocol after you were gone. An hour in, she was at Bay 9 with a man who was struggling to stop coughing long enough to answer her questions when she heard, from somewhere in the main ER, a voice she recognized. Not Voss, not Deborah. Dr. Philip Okafor, the hospital's chief medical officer. She hadn't seen Okafor in months. He was an administrative figure now, more boardroom than bedside, but his voice was distinctive, and the words he was using cut through the noise of the ER clearly enough that she heard them from Bay 9. Where is she? Someone told me she's still in the building. A pause, then quieter. I want to talk to her, not to remove her. I want to talk to her. Lena kept her hands moving. She finished what she was doing with the man in Bay 9, handed him off to the nurse beside her with specific written instructions, and walked out of the bay into the main corridor. Okafor saw her immediately. He was 60, broad-shouldered, wore the kind of exhaustion that came from being called in during a crisis, when you had been in the building since 7 a.m. anyway. He walked toward her, and she noted that he was alone. No Waite, no Voss, no one from HR. Dr. Okafor, she said. He stopped in front of her, looked at her for a moment in the way that people looked at you when they were figuring out how to say something they hadn't fully composed yet. I need to understand what happened tonight, he said. With the Gerald Oates order. Walk me through it. It was not what she had expected. She'd been prepared for a version of the termination conversation, for administrative language, for someone telling her that regardless of circumstances, she had no standing to be on the premises. This was none of those things. Here, she said, unless you want to wait until the ER is clear. He looked around at the controlled chaos surrounding them. Could be a while. Here's fine. She walked him through it, Standing in the corridor with gurneys moving around them and monitors beeping and the particular smell of a chemical exposure event filling the air, acetate and antiseptic, and the metallic undertone of too many frightened people in a confined space. She gave it to him in sequence, factual, without editorializing, the same way she'd given it to herself in the hallway when she'd been trying to understand what she was dealing with. The flag, the order, the call, the hold, the complaint, the termination. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "The hold you filed, is it still active?" "Gerald Oates should be checked," she said. It was not an answer to his question, and they both knew it. He pulled out his own phone, typed something, waited. The response came quickly enough that whoever he'd messaged was either on the floor or had been expecting the question. His expression changed in a way that was small and controlled, but visible. "Mr. Oates is stable," he said. The order was not administered. When the termination was being processed, the medication hold flagged a review alert and the night pharmacist declined to release it without attending sign-off. He paused. Dr. Voss's sign-off was not obtained. "Because he was busy with the John Doe," she said. "With Marcus Holt." "Yes." Another pause. "Ms. Dawson," the main ER doors opened. Not the automatic sliding doors from the ambulance bay, the heavy side doors, the ones that faced the street, the ones that were usually locked from the outside after 9 p.m. They opened, and through them came 4 people in the kind of posture that she recognized before she recognized anything else about them. Controlled movement, distributed spacing, eyes going to corners and exits before faces. 2 in civilian clothes that were doing a poor job of concealing the kind of physical readiness underneath them, and 2 in actual tactical gear that wasn't concealing anything. Behind them, through the still open door, she could see a vehicle. Dark, no exterior markings, the antenna configuration on the roof that did not belong to any civilian entity she'd ever worked with. The ER went noticeably quieter. One of the civilians, a woman, mid-30s, short-cropped hair, the walk of someone who had spent serious time in serious places, moved toward the nursing station, showed something to the charge nurse there, and said something Lena couldn't hear. The charge nurse pointed at Lena. The woman turned, bound her across the room, and walked directly toward her. She moved through the ER like it wasn't a crowded emergency department in the middle of a mass casualty event, like it was a space she had already mentally cleared and categorized and was simply moving through. She stopped in front of Lena. Dr. Okafor beside her straightened slightly. The woman looked at Lena for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "You're Dawson." "Yes. Marcus Holt said you'd still be here." She reached into her jacket and produced credentials that she held at chest height for 3 full seconds, enough time to read them. Federal. Not a department Lena had expected, but not one that surprised her either. "I'm Agent Sable Reyes. I need to know everything Holt told you tonight." "He didn't tell me much," Lena said. "Boy," Lena spoke more than he should have. Reyes glanced around the ER, a fast survey, professional, taking in the patients and the staff, and the layout in one pass. "We have a situation that just escalated. The people who shot Holt tonight, we have reason to believe they know where he is." She looked back at Lena. "And we have reason to believe there's someone inside this hospital right now who told them." The ER continued its noise around them. Gurneys, monitors, the soft overlay of a dozen conversations. Lena felt the shape of the night shift again, the shape she'd identified in the hallway after the first phone call, the click of something moving into alignment that she'd recognized from other nights in other places. "Someone on staff?" she said. Reyes's expression didn't change, but something in it did. "Someone with access," she said. "That's all I can give you right now." She paused. "Holt specifically requested that you be informed. He also specifically requested that you not be left alone in this building tonight." Dr. Okafor made a sound that was not quite a word. Lena looked at Reyes. "What do you need from me?" "Right now, I need you in the same room as Holt. We're consolidating." She glanced at Okafor. "Doctor, I need your ER cleared of non-essential personnel in the next 10 minutes. The patients stay. The minimum staff to manage them stays. Everyone else, I need them accounted for and in one location." Okafor said carefully, This is my hospital. I understand that, Reyes said, and she said it without any particular edge, just as a statement of a fact she acknowledged and was moving past. And in approximately 4 minutes, my superior officer is going to walk through that door and explain the federal dimension of this situation in more formal terms. I'm telling you now so that when he does, you have 4 minutes of lead time. She was already turning back toward her team when something in the ER changed. A shift in the sound pattern. A door Lena wasn't watching opening somewhere to her left. A current of cold air that meant an exterior access point. Reyes turned before Lena did. At the far end of the ER, near the secondary entrance that connected to the hospital's service corridor, a figure in scrubs had stopped moving. He was carrying a supply tray. He'd been there, presumably, for some portion of the last several minutes, moving through the ER the way supply staff move through it. Visible and therefore invisible. Background, not looked at directly. But he was looking at Reyes, directly, and he was not moving toward a patient or a bay or a nursing station. He was looking at the door he'd come through, calculating something, the tray tilting in his hands. Reyes said very quietly, "Don't." The tray hit the floor. He ran. 2 of Reyes's team were already moving before the tray finished clattering across the linoleum. They split without being told to. Left and right, cutting off the angles, the kind of coordinated response that didn't come from a signal, but from years of working together until movement became shared language. The man in scrubs was fast, but he'd hesitated for the half-second it took him to make the decision. And that half-second was the difference between reaching the service corridor door and not reaching it. He didn't reach it. The takedown was controlled and efficient and happened against the wall beside a supply cart in a way that minimized the distance it traveled into the ER proper. One of Reyes's people had him face first against the drywall, with his wrists locked before most of the ER staff had fully processed what they were watching. The second agent came in from the other side and completed the restraint while the first one talked into a radio clipped to his collar, quiet and fast. The ER had gone completely silent. 41 chemical exposure patients, an overwhelmed staff, a mass casualty event still unfolding. And every single person in the room was looking at the man in scrubs pinned against the wall, and at the 2 federal agents holding him there, and at the supply tray on the floor with syringes and gauze packets scattered around it like punctuation. Reyes didn't look at him. She was already on her radio. Lena was looking at the scrubs. Blue standard-issue Harrow General, the kind worn by supply techs and orderlies, and the rotation of contract staff that moved through the building on a given week. She'd seen this man in the building. She was almost certain of it. Not certain enough to place him, but certain enough to know his face had been in her peripheral vision at least once tonight, in a context that hadn't required her to look at him directly. That was how it worked. You stayed visible enough that no one looked at you closely. "Dawson." Reyes was beside her again, speaking low. "4th floor. Now. My people are moving Holt." "Where?" "More secure room. The one he's in has a window that faces the street." She was already walking. "Come on," Dr. Okafor said from behind them. "Someone needs to tell me what is happening in my hospital." Reyes kept moving. 4 minutes, doctor. I promised you 4 minutes." They took the stairs again. Lena, Reyes, and one of the tactical agents, a man built like someone had stacked rectangles on top of each other, who moved with the careful quiet of someone very large who had learned to compensate for it. He went first up each landing, cleared it without appearing to clear it, and then held position while they moved past. The 3 of them made it to 4 in under 90 seconds. The hallway looked different now. One of Reyes's other agents was already there, standing at a position near the elevator that was not quite blocking it, but was clearly not casual. And Dr. Sims was at the nursing station with the expression of someone who had been told several things in rapid succession and was still sorting them. Room 412 was being vacated. Through the open door, Lena could see the other agent, the woman who'd been second through the ER, disconnecting Holt's monitoring leads with the practiced speed of someone who'd done field medicine. Not reckless, but stripped of the institutional slowness that came from doing things in a fully equipped environment where time wasn't the primary variable. Holt was awake. More awake than he'd been an hour ago. The anesthesia had mostly cleared, leaving him with the specific uncomfortable alertness of someone whose pain medication was working, but whose mind had decided to come fully online regardless. He was watching the agent disconnect him with the patient expression of a man who had been moved under less comfortable circumstances and understood this was the version that wasn't trying to kill him. He saw Lena in the doorway. "The guy in the ER," he said. It wasn't a question. "Contained," Reyes said from behind her. "How long was he on the floor?" "Don't know yet." Holt's jaw set. If he had a phone, working on that assumption, Reyes moved past Lena into the room. "We're putting you in 421. Interior room, one entry point, no exterior windows. Can you walk?" "Can I walk?" he repeated, flat. "I'm asking clinically." "No," Lena said from the doorway. Both of them looked at her. "He had a hepatic laceration repaired 4 hours ago. He should not be walking under his own power." She came into the room and looked at the agent who'd been working on his leads. "There's a wheelchair in the supply room at the end of the hall. Get it." The agent looked at Reyes. "Get it?" Reyes said. While they waited, Lena checked Holt's drain output, lower than she wanted but within range, and looked at his color and the quality of his breathing and the way he was holding his torso, which told her he was managing significant pain with the practiced expression of someone who'd had significant pain before and knew that expressing it didn't help. "Scale of 1 to 10, she said. 4. "You're lying." 6, he said. 6.5. "Your drain output is low. That could be fine, or it could be the laceration site reacting to movement. If you feel sudden sharp pain in your right side when we move you, you tell me immediately. Not when we get there. Immediately." "Understood." "I mean it." "Dawson." His voice had shifted slightly. Quieter, more direct. "I know you mean it. I'll tell you." The wheelchair came. They moved him. Mott, room 421 was smaller, an interior room used for post-procedure overflow, the kind of room that didn't get assigned if something better was available. Single entry, as Reyes had said, and the agent, his name, she'd gathered, was Tanner, positioned himself in the hallway outside it in a way that made the room feel, from the inside, like a box with one opening that was covered. Reyes stood near the door. Lena pulled a chair to the bedside and sat in it because she was tired and because standing was energy, and she wasn't sure yet what the rest of the night required. "The man in the ER," she said to Reyes. "Who is he?" "Contract staff, based on the ID. We're running it." Reyes had her phone out, reading something. "Hospital records show he was added to the supply rotation 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks ago, Lena said. "Holt's operation has been running for 8 weeks. Reyes looked up. "Someone placed him here in advance." The room processed that. Even Holt, who presumably had known things were compromised before tonight, went slightly more still. "The operation was supposed to be a 2-week extraction," Holt said. "Asset was getting moved. I was running security on the handoff. Somewhere between the planning stage and the execution, the location of our first safe point was burned. Someone with access to the planning documents," Reyes said. "We've narrowed it to 4 people inside the unit." "Have you?" His voice had an edge. "When were you going to tell me that?" "I'm telling you now." "You're telling me now because I'm in a hospital bed and I can't do anything about it. I'm telling you now because the situation has changed and you need the information." She said it without apology, and he looked at her for a long moment and then looked away, which was its own kind of acknowledgement that the argument wasn't one he could win from where he was sitting. Lena watched the exchange and said nothing. She recognized the texture of it, the compressed trust between people who worked in dangerous conditions together, the way that trust got strained without breaking, the specific vocabulary of people who were used to not saying everything, and were now in a situation where they needed to say more than usual. "The drive," she said. Both of them looked at her. "Holt told me there was a drive logged at the property desk under a different name." Reyes looked at Holt. "It's a backup copy of the asset documentation," he said. "Names, locations, timeline. If the original went with the operation..." He stopped. "It did," Reyes said quietly. A silence. "Then the drive is what we have," Holt said. Reyes turned to Lena. "He said he told you the name it was logged under." "He didn't," Lena said. "We were interrupted." Holt said, "Warwick. It's logged under Warwick." Reyes was already on her radio. While Reyes managed the logistics of retrieving the drive, Lena sat in the chair beside Holt's bed and felt the weight of the last 6 hours settle across her shoulders in a way she hadn't let it while she was moving. Her feet hurt. Her lower back had the particular stiffness that came from hours of bending at a height that wasn't quite right for her frame. She was aware of being hungry in a distant way, the kind of hunger that had been present for a while but kept getting overridden by other priorities. Holt was watching her. "You've been on your feet since before they fired you," he said. "I'm fine." "I didn't say you weren't." He paused. "I'm saying I notice." She looked at him. There was something in his face that was not pity and was not professional assessment, something more direct than either of those things. The look of someone who had been in situations that stripped away the usual social distances and were now navigating the version of a person that those situations revealed. "Why me?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. Specifically, "There are people with my background in this city. There are 2 people with your background in Duskfield, and I checked both of you out 18 months ago when I got the assignment here." He shifted carefully against the pillow. "The other one is a good operator. I've got no issues with her record." A pause. "But she's connected to a veterans network that has 2 members who are connected to the contracting firm that our asset was running against." Lena looked at him. "Not necessarily compromised," he said. "I don't know that, but I needed someone who was completely clean of the network, and you are. You've been here 4 years. You work your shifts. You go home. You don't belong to anything." He paused again. "Also, you pulled a tourniquet off a dead operator to use on me in 2014 because you'd run out of your own and you didn't flinch about it. That's the kind of thing you don't forget." She hadn't known he'd seen that. She'd thought he was unconscious by then. "I wasn't sure you were going to make it through surgery tonight," she said. "Me neither." He said it factually, without drama. "Voss is a better surgeon than you expected him to be?" "Voss is a fine surgeon when the problem is clearly in front of him and he has the right equipment." She looked at her hands. "His problems are different. He fired you. He's been trying to fire me for 2 years." She paused. "Tonight he had the right paperwork. For the wrong reason. Most things happen that way." Holt looked at her for a moment. "The patient, the one you flagged the medication for, is he okay?" "Stable, as of an hour ago. The order wasn't administered." "Because of your hold?" "Because a pharmacist did their job." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You did your job too, and got fired for it." She said it without bitterness, more like reading a fact from a chart. "It's not the first time something went wrong because I was right." He didn't push that. He seemed to understand that it wasn't an invitation for reassurance, just a statement of the shape of things, and he let it sit. She checked his drain again, still within range. His color was better than it had been 30 minutes ago, which meant the movement hadn't cost him what she'd feared it might. Reyes came back into the room carrying a small sealed evidence bag with a USB drive inside it. "Property desk had it," she said. "Logged 40 minutes after Holt arrived." She looked at him. "You logged it while you were being prepped for surgery?" "I logged it when they were doing intake," he said, "before I went under." "How did you—" "I had it in my boot," he said. "I told the intake nurse it was a medical alert drive and asked her to log it for me. She probably thought it was a medical ID." A pause. "Nice woman. Didn't question it." Reyes looked like she had several things to say about that and was choosing not to say any of them. She held up the evidence bag. "This goes to my team lead tonight. Once we've pulled the data, we'll know whether the asset documentation is intact." "And if it's not," Holt asked, "then we have a much longer conversation about what the last 8 weeks of your operation actually produced." He looked at the ceiling. Something crossed his face that she didn't have a name for. Not defeat, not frustration, something quieter and more complicated than either. Lena stood up. She'd been sitting long enough. "I'm going to check on the ER situation. The chemical exposure patients need a second assessment pass, and I don't know if anyone down there has the capacity to—" The door opened. Tanner, from the hallway, didn't knock. He pushed through with the specific velocity of someone delivering information that doesn't wait. "Reyes," his voice was flat. "We've got a problem." Define problem. The guy from the ER, the one we contained, he had a phone. Prepaid, already wiped, but our tech got a partial on the last outgoing. 11 minutes ago. He paused. It went to a number we've seen before. It's associated with the same network that burned the safe house. The room went tight in the way rooms went tight when everyone in them understood a thing at the same moment. They know he's here, Reyes said. Not a question. They knew 30 minutes ago, Tanner said. Whatever they're going to do about it, they've had time to plan it. Reyes was already on her radio. Lena was already at the door looking out into the hallway, taking in what she could see and calculating what she couldn't. How many entry points does this building have? Reyes asked her. Main entrance, ER bay, 2 service entrances, the parking structure connection on level 2, and a loading dock on the north side that's usually unlocked during shift changes. She paused. Plus the roof access, which is alarmed, but the alarm has been malfunctioning for 3 months. Facilities has a work order on it. Reyes looked at her with an expression that contained a complicated quantity of information about what she thought of a roof alarm that had been malfunctioning for 3 months. And then she turned back to her radio and began issuing instructions in the clipped language of someone running a situation that had just expanded. The next 8 minutes were a controlled escalation. Reyes's team locked down the entry points they could reach with the personnel they had, which wasn't all of them. She had 4 agents in the building, and a building with 6 entry points was a geometry problem that didn't have a clean solution. She was on the phone with her superior, and Lena could hear from the cadence and the yes sirs that reinforcements were coming, but coming from a distance that wasn't close enough to matter in the immediate. Dr. Okafor arrived on 4. He'd gotten his 4 minutes and then some, and he arrived with the expression of a man who had been briefed in the elevator by one of Reyes's agents and was processing it in real time. He looked at Lena. She tells me you know this building better than anyone currently in it. I've worked here 4 years. The federal team is short on personnel. He said it carefully, like a man choosing his words with awareness of what they implied. They need someone who knows where things are and can move through the building without raising alarm. He paused. I'm not asking you to do anything law enforcement should do. I'm asking if you can help with the parts that are medical and logistical. Reyes beside him said, we need the chemical exposure patients moved away from the ER bay, if possible. If someone comes in through the ambulance entrance, the critical ones can't be moved safely, Lena said. 3 of them are on respiratory support that can't be interrupted without risking hypoxia. She was already thinking through the layout of the ground floor, the relationship between the ER bay and the interior corridors, the rooms that connected through the supply corridor versus the ones that required transit through the main ER. But I can consolidate the ambulatory ones into the internal waiting area and redirect incoming traffic through the main entrance. Do it, Reyes said. I need Amara and 2 other nurses. Get them. She was moving before the sentence was finished. The next 40 minutes operated on 2 tracks simultaneously. On one track, Reyes's team worked the external situation, coordinating with local law enforcement, who had been brought in under a federal umbrella that meant they were cooperating without being given the full picture, and trying to identify whether the network that had burned Holt's operation was actually moving on the hospital, or whether the phone call was a precaution, a check-in, a contingency that might not activate tonight. On the other track, Lena moved through the ER with Amara and a nurse named Prescott, who'd been on since 6 p.m. and was running on his 3rd coffee and a particular brand of stubbornness that she recognized as the kind of person who didn't stop until someone made them. They worked systematically, identifying which patients could be safely relocated, which ones couldn't, restructuring the flow of the ER so that the critical bay nearest the ambulance entrance had a minimum of personnel without abandoning the patients in it, and creating a barrier of logistical normality over the top of what was actually happening so that the 100+ people in the building who weren't part of it didn't start panicking. A panicking hospital was its own mass casualty event. She'd seen it happen once, in a different context, and it cost more than the original incident. Roland Voss found her in the middle of the 3rd relocation. She was helping Amara move a 40-year-old woman with chemical eye irritation and a portable oxygen setup from Bay 7 to the internal waiting corridor. And she looked up, and Voss was there, standing at the edge of the bay, with his hands in the pockets of his surgical gown and an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not angry, not cold. Something she'd call uncertain, except that it didn't fit with anything she'd ever observed about him. He looked at the patient, then at her. What's happening? Security situation. The ER is being reconfigured to... I know about the security situation. Okafor briefed me. He paused. I mean, what are you doing? She kept moving because the patient was in a wheelchair and in transit, and stopping to have this conversation would require stopping the patient. Moving ambulatory patients to reduce exposure in the primary bay. He walked beside her, which surprised her enough that she nearly stopped, but didn't. Deborah doesn't have enough people, he said. I know. That's why I'm here. He was quiet for a few steps, then, the Gerald Oates order. Not now. I looked at his chart an hour ago. The flag was clear. I've been prescribing to that class of patient for 15 years and I've never... He stopped. Started again. I've been dismissing your concern reports for 2 years because I thought you were systematically undermining clinical authority. Tonight, another stop. She got the patient to the waiting corridor, ensured she was settled and that Prescott had eyes on her, and then she turned and looked at Voss directly. Tonight what? She said. He met her eyes. I think I may have had you wrong. She held his gaze for a moment. There were a number of things she could have said. She chose one. We can talk about it after. He nodded, once. What do you need? She looked at him. At this man who had fired her and had built a 4-year campaign of professional attrition against her, who was now standing in a compromised ER offering to help. She did the calculation quickly. He was a skilled surgeon, he knew the building, and he had authority that she didn't have, which meant he could move staff and resources in ways she currently couldn't. I need someone to cover the critical bay while I finish relocations, she said. The 3 patients on respiratory support in Bay 2, eyes on their monitors every 5 minutes. If anything changes, I'll stay with them. 5-minute checks, not 10. 5 minutes, he said. He went. She turned back toward the ER. She was halfway through the 4th relocation when every phone in the building went off at once. Not ringtones. The emergency alert tone. The one that sounded like the inside of an alarm. The one that the hospital system reserved for mass casualty escalation and shelter in place. It pulsed through the overhead speakers and through every staff device simultaneously, and above it, the PA system activated. The voice on the PA was Okafor's. Controlled, clear, the voice of a man who understood that how you said something in a crisis mattered as much as what you said. Attention all staff. Harrow General is initiating a security lockdown protocol effective immediately. All exterior entrances are secured. All non-essential personnel should move to designated interior gathering points. This is a precautionary measure. Patients and staff are safe. Further updates will follow. The ER went through its second silence of the evening. Lena looked at Amara. Go, Amara said. I've got this bay. Go. She went. She took the stairs again. On the way up, she passed 2 of Reyes's people coming down, and one of them caught her arm. Not aggressively, more like a flag. Reyes needs you on 4, he said. Now. She changed direction without stopping and took the stairs back up. The 4th floor hallway was different. Tanner was no longer in his casual position near the elevator. He was pressed against the wall beside the stairwell door on the far end, in a posture that communicated something specific about what he expected to come through it. The second agent was at the nursing station with Sims, who had the expression of a woman who had decided to be very calm and was executing that decision with considerable force of will. Reyes was in the hallway outside 421 with her phone to her ear, and when she saw Lena, she ended the call. We have a confirmed approach, she said. 2 individuals were picked up on exterior camera at the North Service entrance 7 minutes ago. They're inside the building. The loading dock, Lena said. The alarm was disabled from the outside, professionally. Reyes's voice was flat. Local law enforcement has units on the exterior. We're waiting on federal backup, but ETA is 14 minutes. The 2 individuals inside, we don't know where they are. Lena looked at the hallway. She thought about the building the way she knew it. Not as a tactical problem, because that wasn't her training exactly, but as a space she'd moved through for 4 years at every hour of the day and night, in every configuration, in every version of crisis and calm. She knew where things were. She knew where people went when they didn't want to be seen. She knew which corridors were dark, at which hours, and which routes between floors didn't pass through the staffed areas. The service corridor on 2, she said. It connects to the internal stairwell that comes out on 3 and 4. It's not staffed after 10 p.m., and it doesn't have cameras between the west junction and the stairwell door. Reyes looked at her. You're sure? I filed a safety concern about the camera gap 14 months ago. Facilities said it was on the list. She paused. It's still on the list. Reyes was already radioing Tanner. She relayed the corridor information, clipped and precise, and Tanner responded with 2 words and moved. Stay here, Reyes said to Lena. The patients, Voss is with the critical patients. Sims has the floor. Stay here. She looked at her directly. You've been essential tonight. Don't get shot because you went somewhere you didn't need to be. It was a reasonable instruction. Lena acknowledged it. Reyes moved toward the far stairwell with the second agent, and the hallway went to the kind of quiet that was the opposite of the managed quiet from earlier. This was active quiet, the absence of ordinary sound that happened when a building was holding its breath. Lena stood outside room 421 and listened. She heard it before she could have explained how. A change in the pressure of sound from somewhere below. The way a building's acoustics shifted when a door opened in an interior corridor and the air moved differently. She'd learned to hear that kind of thing in buildings with different construction, under circumstances where the difference mattered. She pushed the door of 421 open and looked at Holt. He was watching her face. He read it immediately. How close? He said. Below us. Maybe below and coming up. He looked at the room. Single entry, as Reyes had specified, but one entry was also one exit. She saw him running the same calculation. The window, he said. Second floor equivalent from the interior courtyard. Non-opening safety glass. If it came to it, it won't come to that, she said. But she moved to the bedside and detached his drain bag from the bed rail and hung it from the IV pole so it would move with him if it needed to, and checked that his IV line had enough slack for repositioning, and did all of this in about 20 seconds without making a production of it. He watched her. You've done this before. I've moved patients under pressure before, she said. It's not the same. It's close enough. She was about to say something when the sound came from the hallway. Not a gunshot, nothing that dramatic, but a crash. The particular crash of a wheeled cart impacting a wall, followed by a voice that wasn't Tanner's or Reyes and wasn't speaking English. She closed the door of 421 from the inside and turned off the overhead light, leaving only the low glow of the monitoring equipment, and she stood between the door and the bed with the only thing she had, which was the knowledge of this room and this building, and the particular kind of stillness she'd learned in places where being still was sometimes the only move you had left. The hallway outside went quiet. Then the door handle moved. It moved slowly, not a push, not a test, but the specific rotation of a handle being turned by someone who didn't want to make noise, which was a different thing, and it told her something about who was on the other side of it. She looked at Holt. He looked back at her. She picked up the IV pole. The door opened, and Roland Voss stumbled through it with his hands up and blood on his collar, and behind him, pressing close, was a man she'd never seen before with his forearm across Voss's chest, and something in his other hand that she identified in the first half-second as a compact trauma blade, the kind carried by people who operated in environments where firearms weren't the practical first choice. The man's eyes went to Holt on the bed, then to Lena, then to the IV pole in her hands. He said something in a language she didn't speak. Lena said, in a voice that was very level, "He can't be moved. He had surgery 4 hours ago. If you move him, the internal repair site will open and he will bleed out before you get him to wherever you're going." The man looked at her. His arm tightened across Voss's chest and Voss made a choked sound. "He is not going anywhere," the man said, in accented but clear English. "You are." And he looked at her with the specific look of a person who had just changed their primary objective, and she understood in the same moment that she was no longer a bystander in this room. She was the problem he'd decided to solve instead. The man made a mistake in the first 2 seconds, and the mistake was that he looked at the IV pole in her hands and decided it was a prop. She understood why. She was a nurse in a hospital room, standing between a bed and a wall, holding a piece of medical equipment that weighed maybe 4 pounds. He had a blade and a hostage, and the momentum of a situation he'd controlled from the moment he entered the hallway. From where he stood, the calculation was simple. It wasn't simple. She didn't swing the pole. She didn't telegraph anything. What she did was take 1 step to her left, which shifted her out of the direct line between him and the bed, and in the half-second that his eyes tracked the movement, because eyes always tracked movement, that was the exploit, she drove the base of the pole into the floor at an angle and used the leverage to close the distance between them faster than a person holding a piece of medical equipment was supposed to be able to close it. The blade came up. She'd expected that. She turned her forearm into it instead of away from it, away lost distance, into it absorbed the angle, and felt the edge catch the outside of her left forearm without going deep. And then she had her right hand on his wrist, and she had her weight behind it, and she had the specific mechanical advantage that came from knowing exactly where a joint would give before it broke, which she'd learned not in a hospital but in a different kind of training. In a building in North Carolina, a long time before she'd ever put on scrubs. He went down hard. Voss stumbled forward when the arm cleared from across his chest and caught himself on the doorframe, breathing in the ragged way of a man who'd had his airway compressed and was rediscovering that breathing was a thing he could do. The man on the floor was not unconscious. She hadn't tried to make him unconscious. That was the kind of thing that went wrong in ways you couldn't predict. She had his wrist locked at an angle that made using the blade a very bad idea for him, and she held it there with her knee in a position that communicated the same information, and she said, flat and clear, "Drop it." He held for 2 seconds. She increased the angle by 15 degrees. The blade hit the floor. She kicked it toward the bed and looked up at Holt, who had gotten himself into a half-seated position through what must have been a significant expenditure of will over pain. "I said I'd tell you if something changed," he said. "I see it." She looked at the doorway. "Voss?" Voss was still gripping the doorframe, blood on his collar, a cut at his jawline that was superficial but bleeding in the way face wounds did, making it look worse than it was. He was looking at her and at the man on the floor with an expression that contained several things she didn't have time to catalog. "Voss?" She kept her voice even. "I need you to go to the nursing station and get Sims to call Reyes right now. Tell her 421-1 secured." He pushed off the doorframe and went. She stayed on the floor until she heard boots in the hallway, Tanner's specific tread, which she'd memorized without meaning to. And then Tanner and Reyes were both in the doorway, and the situation completed its transfer of custody in the way these things did when the right people finally arrived. Reyes looked at the man on the floor, then at Lena, then at Lena's left forearm, where a line of blood was tracking down toward her wrist. "That needs to be looked at," Reyes said. "It's superficial. It's still bleeding." "I'll look at it in a minute." She stood up. Her knee hurt from the floor. She didn't mention that either. Okay. The second intruder had been found and contained by local law enforcement in the service corridor on the second floor, 14 minutes before the first federal backup units arrived. He'd been moving toward the internal stairwell when an officer who'd been stationed at the 2-3 junction, because Lena had told Reyes about that junction, and Reyes had relayed it, and someone had actually listened, found him, and made the contact. It wasn't clean. The officer had a bruised hand and a torn jacket, and the intruder had a dislocated shoulder that was going to require treatment, but contained was contained. By the time the building returned to something resembling a normal operational state, it was 1:40 in the morning. Lena sat in the break room on the second floor with her left forearm on the table and a field dressing she'd applied herself from the supply cabinet in the hallway, and she drank a cup of coffee that someone had made and left on the counter and that she didn't ask about. The cut was 4 centimeters, clean, had stopped bleeding within 8 minutes of pressure. It would need closure strips and a couple of days of careful movement. It was, objectively, the least significant injury she'd sustained in her career, and it hurt more than most of the others because she was tired and the adrenaline was gone, and her body was filing its complaints in the particular loudness of quiet rooms. Amara came in and sat across from her without saying anything for about 30 seconds. Then, "The chemical exposure patients are all stable. The 3 criticals in Bay 2 are looking better than they were 2 hours ago." "Good." "The woman in 408, the one with the ventilator, she asked about you." Lena looked up. "She said the nurse who stayed with her during the blackout had nice hands," Amara said. "She meant it as a compliment. I don't know exactly what that means, but she said it twice." Lena looked back at her coffee. Something moved in her chest that she didn't try to name. "Voss got 4 stitches, Amara continued, the cut on his jaw. He did them himself, in the minor procedures room. At 1 in the morning. She paused. Prescott watched him do it. Said it was the most unsettling thing he'd ever seen. Despite everything, Lena felt something at the edge of her mouth that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood. Reyes wants to talk to you, Amar said. When you're ready, no rush. She said specifically no rush, which I think means 20 minutes. Tell her 15. Amar stood. She got to the door and then stopped, and Lena knew from the pause that there was one more thing. Curtis Waite went home at 11, Amar said. Before the lockdown. He doesn't know yet what happened tonight. Another pause. Dr. Okafor has been on the phone with the board since midnight. Lena set her cup down. About what? About a lot of things, Amar said. Some of them involve you. She left before Lena could ask what she meant. Reyes had requisitioned the small conference room on the third floor, the one used for family consultations that nobody wanted to have in a regular office. It had a round table and 6 chairs and a box of tissues on the credenza that no one ever acknowledged but everyone was aware of. 2 of her agents were at the table with laptops open. The federal backup, 4 additional agents who had arrived in the 1 a.m. window, were distributed through the building doing things Lena wasn't being briefed on, which was fine. She sat across from Reyes and put her bandaged forearm on the table between them. Reyes looked at it. I told you to get that looked at. I did. By someone other than yourself. Same result. Reyes almost said something and didn't. She pulled a tablet toward herself and turned it so Lena could see the screen. On it was an image, a still from a security camera, grainy, showing a figure in a corridor. The figure was in civilian clothes, not scrubs. The timestamp was from 2 weeks prior. Recognize anyone, Reyes asked. Lena looked at the image. No. Look at the background. She looked at the background. It was a hospital corridor. The specific shade of wall paint and the configuration of the ceiling fixtures told her it was the 2nd floor, west wing. At the edge of the frame was the corner of a door with a number she could partially read. 2 something. Maybe 214. Who is it? She said. His name is Darian Kolb. He's been identified as a logistics coordinator for the network that burned Holt's operation. This image is from your hospital's internal camera system, taken 14 days ago. Reyes paused. The supply tech you identified in the ER tonight. His name is Theo Brandt. He and Kolb are connected through 2 intermediary contacts in a network that's been operating in the Pacific Northwest for approximately 3 years. She let that sit for a moment. Holt's operation was specifically targeting the financial infrastructure of that network. Asset documentation, movement records, front company accounts. The drive, Lena said. The drive has everything we need to proceed. The asset documentation is intact. Reyes set the tablet down. Because Marcus Holt logged it under a false name in the property office of a hospital that was, at that moment, in the process of firing one of their nurses. In all of the institutional chaos of that particular hour, nobody thought to look at the property desk. Lena didn't say anything. I want to be clear about something, Reyes said. The way tonight went. We didn't plan for any of this. Holt operating alone, making it to your hospital specifically, you being here. None of that was controlled or coordinated or clean. It was a series of contingencies that worked out because of choices individual people made under pressure. It worked out approximately, Lena said. 2 people got into the building. 2 people got into the building and are now in federal custody with enough physical evidence on them to add a significant count to what we already have. Reyes met her eyes. I've been doing this for 11 years. Approximately is what you get. Approximately is what I call a good night. Lena considered that. What happens now, she said. Now we prosecute. The network, the intermediaries, Brandt. Reyes paused. And we look at everyone who is connected to the planning documents for Holt's operation. Her voice stayed level on that last part in a way that suggested it wasn't going to be a small or pleasant process. That's above my level. And Holt? Holt stays under federal care for recovery. He'll be moved tomorrow to a facility better suited to his security needs. Reyes paused. He asked me to tell you something. Lena waited. He said, and I'm quoting, she knows what she did. She doesn't need me to tell her, but tell her anyway. Reyes looked faintly uncomfortable delivering this, in the way of a pragmatic person asked to convey something that wasn't purely logistical. I don't know what it refers to. I do, Lena said. She went back to Holt's room at 2 a.m, when the building had settled into its late-night operational rhythm and the federal presence had contracted to a minimum. He was awake, sitting with slightly more uprightness than before, which she noted as a positive sign and immediately cross-referenced against his drain output and the color under his eyes. "You look better," she said. "I feel approximately terrible," he said, with the measured delivery of someone who had absorbed the word from a conversation they weren't supposed to have overheard. "Someone keeps using that word tonight." She sat in the chair. "Your surgical site is stable. The movement earlier didn't open anything." "Good to know." "You'll be moved tomorrow. Federal facility, better equipped for your actual situation." He nodded once and then looked at his hands for a moment. "You got cut. Superficially. How superficially?" 4 centimeters, no tendon involvement, closure strips are holding." She paused. "I've had worse from a IV insertion gone sideways." He looked at her. "In my experience, people who say things like that are either telling the truth or are very good at performing it." "In my experience, the difference only matters to the person saying it." Something in his face relaxed slightly. Not relief exactly, but the version of it that came from finding out that someone you'd bet on had come through the way you'd expected. "I need to ask you something," she said. "The person in your unit, the one feeding locations. Do you know who it is?" A pause. His jaw shifted slightly. "I have a strong suspicion." "Are you going to tell Reyes?" "I told Reyes 90 minutes ago." He looked at the window, the interior wall, no view. "Whether they act on it is above both of our levels." She nodded. She believed him, which didn't make her feel better about it, but also didn't make her feel worse. Some things resolved slowly. She'd learned to hold the ones she couldn't control at a distance that was functional rather than distant. "Get some sleep," she said, standing. "Your body is repairing itself whether you cooperate with it or not, but it does better when you cooperate." "Dawson." He said it before she reached the door. She turned. "Whatever happens with this place." He gestured slightly at the room, at the building, at the night that had happened in it. "You did your job tonight, the whole job." He paused. "That's all." She held that for a second. "Get some sleep," she said again, and left. The third-floor conference room at 2:30 a.m. had a different population than it had at midnight. Reyes's team was consolidated and working. Dr. Okafor was at the table with a legal pad, and the expression of a man who had been awake for 22 hours and had another 6 ahead of him. Voss was there. 4 stitches on his jaw, dried blood on his collar, the expression of a person who had sat with something difficult for long enough that the expression had gone past difficult into something else. He saw her when she came in. She sat across from him, not next to him. Okafor looked up briefly and then went back to his legal pad. Voss said, "I've been reviewing your concern reports." "All of them?" "The last 2 years." He said it without looking away from her, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. "There are 23. I dismissed or counterfiled all but 2. She waited. 11 of them identified issues that were subsequently confirmed by other means. 3 of them. I don't have an explanation for why I missed what you were seeing. The Oates order was the most serious, but it wasn't the first time you caught something I didn't." He stopped. Then, "I told myself you were systematically undermining clinical authority because it was easier to believe that than to look at what the reports were actually saying." The room was quiet enough that she could hear Okafor's pen moving. "What were they saying?" she said. "That there were problems in this department." He said it flatly. "Some of them mine." She sat with that. The version of this conversation she'd run in her head, in various forms, over 4 years, it had been sharper than this. Cleaner. The Roland Voss in those imagined versions had been cornered and defensive, and she'd had the satisfaction of watching him unable to retreat. This version was harder, because he wasn't doing either of those things. He was just sitting across from her at 2:30 in the morning, with blood on his collar, telling her what the record showed, without dressing it up. "I know this doesn't fix what happened," he said. "No," she agreed. "I can't unfile the termination. Administration has the paperwork." "I know that too." He looked at his hands. "For whatever it's worth, I'll correct the record with the board." She looked at him for a long moment. Voss was 62 years old, and he was not a bad surgeon, and he had spent enough of his career inside institutions that gave authority to the people who sounded most certain that he'd stopped questioning whether certainty and correctness were the same thing. That was its own kind of damage. Not malice exactly, but something that produced malicious outcomes anyway. It's worth something, she said finally. Not absolution, just an acknowledgement that something had shifted. Okafor put his pen down. He'd been listening without appearing to, and now he looked at both of them. I've been on the phone with 3 board members, he said, and with the state licensing authority. He looked at Voss. The Gerald Oates Concern Report is going to trigger a formal audit of all clinical complaint responses filed in this department over the last 4 years. The board has authorized it. He paused. That will take time, but it's starting. Voss said nothing. His jaw was set, but he wasn't arguing. As for tonight, Okafor turned to Lena. What you did for this hospital tonight, and the patients in it, goes well past anything the employment situation should allow for. That's something I need to address formally. He held up a hand. Not tonight, but formally and soon. I understand, she said. I'm also initiating a review of the termination through the board's HR Oversight Committee. He said it to Voss as much as to her. Based on what I've seen in the past 6 hours, I have questions about the process. Voss said, I won't obstruct it. It wasn't agreement exactly, but it was the absence of the opposition that would have made it hard. She left the conference room at 3 a.m. and walked the building once. Not for any specific purpose, just the way you walked a space when you didn't know if you'd be back in it. The overnight staff moved around her, familiar faces doing familiar work, the building in its quiet version of itself. She checked on Gerald Oates on the way. He was sleeping, vitals clean, no adverse events. She stood in the doorway of his room for 30 seconds and then moved on. In the parking lot at 3:20, the air was cold and sharp with the early morning dampness that came off the hills east of Duskfield. Her car was where she'd left it, which felt like a long time ago. She sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine and looked at the hospital entrance. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't have saved. Board meeting called for 9 a.m. Okafor wants you there. Sims. She put the phone face down on the passenger seat and started the car. She was 3 blocks from the hospital when the second text came through. She didn't look at it until she reached a red light, and when she did, it was from a different number, a 202 area code she didn't recognize. This is Reyes. Call me before 4 a.m. There's a complication. She looked at the word for a moment. Complication. Reyes didn't use that word lightly. In the 3 hours she'd known the woman, she'd used words like contained and confirmed and secured, the vocabulary of a person who said what things were without padding them. Complication from Reyes was the kind of word that meant something specific, the kind that covered a gap between what you thought was resolved and what you were about to find out was not. She called. Reyes picked up on the second ring. What is it? Lena said. The man who Tanner identified in Holt's unit, Reyes said, the suspected internal source. What about him? He's gone. A pause. He was flagged for monitoring 8 hours ago when Holt gave us the name. At some point in the last 2 hours, he dropped his phone and his service weapon at his desk and walked out of a federal facility in Portland without triggering a single alarm. Lena's hands were still on the wheel. The light had changed. She didn't move. He had clearance for the building, Reyes continued. He knew the camera positions. He knew who was monitoring what. Her voice was controlled, but underneath it was something tight. He also knew about you. Your name, your address, your termination tonight, all of it. The street in front of her was empty. 3 a.m. in Duskfield, a handful of lit windows, the ordinary dark of a city that didn't know what had happened in one of its hospitals in the past 6 hours. What does he want? Lena said, though she already understood the shape of the answer. He wants the drive, Reyes said. And right now you are the most visible person connected to tonight who doesn't have a badge and a weapon and a team around her. A pause. I need you to turn around. Lena looked in her rearview mirror. The road behind her was dark and empty and still. She looked for 3 full seconds. Then the headlights came on. A vehicle, parked at the edge of the road 2 blocks back, lights off until this moment, sitting in the exact position of something that had been waiting for her to get far enough from the hospital that help was no longer a short distance in either direction. She put the car in drive. Reyes, she said. I see it, Reyes said, and Lena understood that she was already being tracked somehow, that the phone or the car or something else was giving her position in real time, and that the 14-minute gap between what was happening now and when federal backup could get to her was not a gap Reyes could close from a phone. "How long?" Lena said. 12 minutes. A pause. "Maybe 10. Lena looked at the road ahead, at the road behind, at the hospital, visible in her mirror as a lit shape 3 blocks back and getting further. "I know this city," she said. "I know you do," Reyes said. "Use it." She didn't run. That was the first decision, and it was made in under 2 seconds, which was how long it took to look at the road ahead and understand that running was what the vehicle behind her expected, that the positioning of it, 2 blocks back, lights now on, engine clearly running, was not the positioning of something trying to catch her, but the positioning of something trying to direct her. You parked 2 blocks back when you wanted to see which way a person turned. You parked 2 blocks back when you had someone waiting at the end of whichever street they chose. She knew this city. She'd said it to Reyes, and she meant it in a specific way. Not the way of someone who'd lived here their whole life and knew the restaurants and the shortcuts, but the way of someone who had spent 4 years doing night shifts and early mornings, and the particular navigation of a person without a partner who moved through a city alone at hours when cities showed you their structure rather than their surface. She knew which streets had cameras. She knew which ones didn't. She knew where the overnight patrol routes ran because she'd been followed by one once, a year ago. A misunderstanding that resolved itself, and she'd noticed the pattern in the resolution. She knew the Civic Center parking structure on Marsh Street stayed open through 4 a.m. for the casino workers on the far side of downtown. She knew it had 2 entrances on different streets, and that the exit from Level 3 connected through a fire door to the pedestrian overpass that crossed to the transit hub, which was staffed and lit and full of cameras at every hour. She also knew, and this was the specific knowledge that mattered right now, that the vehicle behind her had one driver. Reyes had said he, singular. A man who had walked out of a federal facility alone because the people he'd been working with were either in custody or had been distanced from him the moment the operation at the hospital went sideways. He was operating without support in a city he likely did not know the way she knew it, in the middle of the night, and the only advantage he had was whatever he knew about her, which Reyes had indicated was her name, her address, and the events of tonight. He did not know, for instance, that she turned left on Caldwell instead of continuing on Morrison. The headlights behind her turned right, which told her he'd anticipated Morrison and lost her in the first 30 seconds. She didn't feel good about it. She felt the specific cold focus of someone executing a decision and tracking its immediate results, which left no room for feeling good or anything else. She called Reyes back on the car's hands-free. "Left on Caldwell," she said, without preamble. "He went right. I've got maybe 90 seconds before he corrects." "Copy. I've got your GPS. Keep moving." A brief pause. The sound of Reyes talking to someone else, rapid and low. "I need you heading toward a position where we can get to you. Officers are coming from 2 directions. ETA, 10 minutes, possibly 8. "The Marsh Street structure," Lena said. "Level 3. A pause. "Why there?" "Because it's enclosed with multiple entry and exit points. There are cameras on every level. The transit hub across the overpass has staff. And if he follows me in, he's choosing a contained space without knowing the layout." Another pause. Longer. "That logic only holds if he doesn't get to you before we do." "I know," she said. "But the alternative is him following me through residential streets for 8 minutes while I try not to get someone else hurt." She could hear Reyes thinking, the sound of a person running probability in real time. "Level 3, Reyes said. "Move." "Twat." She picked him up again on the Caldwell 5th intersection, headlights in her mirror, the same spread as before, gaining ground because he'd corrected faster than she'd allowed for, which meant he either knew the city better than she'd assumed or had GPS of his own and had run the logical correction. Either way, she had maybe 4 blocks before he closed to a distance that became a different kind of problem. She took the Marsh ramp at a speed that was too fast for the posted limit and not fast enough for the situation, the tires finding their complaint with the curve, and she was inside the structure before his headlights turned on to Marsh. The ramp to Level 3 was a spiral, which meant he couldn't see where she went from the entrance, which gave her 30 seconds she didn't waste. She parked in the far corner of Level 3, against the west wall, away from the overhead lights. She got out of the car and moved immediately. not toward the overpass, which was the obvious exit, but toward the east stairwell, which was not well lit and which she knew from the one time she'd parked here during a 12-hour shift and come back at 4 a.m. to find the elevator out of service. She positioned herself in the stairwell doorway, inside it, which meant she wasn't visible from the ramp level or the main body of the floor, but she had a line of sight through the door's narrow window to the ramp opening and the approach. She called Reyes. "Level 3, east stairwell, door position," she said. "Copy. 6 minutes." She put the phone on silent, kept the call live, and waited. He came up the ramp in under 2 minutes. The vehicle was a gray sedan, rental plate configuration, and he parked it badly, at an angle, in the middle of the lane, which said he wasn't thinking about the parking, he was thinking about her car and where it was. He found it almost immediately. She watched him through the narrow window as he moved toward it, and she got her first clear look at the man Reyes had described. Mid-40s. The build of someone who'd passed a lot of physical evaluations over a lot of years. He moved like Reyes's people moved, that same environmental awareness. The eyes that went to corners before faces. He was wearing dark civilian clothes, and he was holding something low at his right side that she didn't need to see clearly to identify by shape. He reached her car, looked in the window, checked the back seat. His posture changed to the very slight adjustment of a person who has just confirmed that what they're looking for isn't where they expected it, and who is now running the next calculation. He turned toward the stairwells. She moved back from the window, into the stairwell, 3 steps up, where the angle put her above the door's line of sight. She was aware of her own breathing in the way you became aware of it when you needed it to be quiet, and she managed it the same way she managed it when patients needed the room calm. Deliberately, from the diaphragm, keeping the rhythm even. The door opened. He came in fast and low, which was correct technique, and the stairwell lighting was poor enough that the first second gave him very little. He cleared left, then right, then up. And she was above him on the stairs, which was not where he'd looked last, and she had 3 steps of elevation and the metal handrail and the specific knowledge that she was more tired than she'd ever been in a professional context, and that tired was not the same as slow. She said, "There are cameras on the ramp and 2 officers entering the structure right now from the Marsh Street entrance." He went very still. "The call is live," she said, meaning the phone in her jacket pocket. "Whatever you're thinking about doing in here is going to be heard and documented and added to what they already have." A beat of silence. The stairwell hummed with the structure's ventilation. "You don't have the drive," he said. His voice was controlled. The voice of a man who had spent years in situations that required him to be controlled, and it was working, mostly. "No," she said, "I don't." "Then what do I want with you?" "That's what you're working out right now," she said, "and the answer you're going to arrive at is nothing. Because the drive is already in federal hands, the asset documentation is already processed, and the 2 men who came into the hospital tonight are already in custody. The only thing left undone tonight is you." She could hear him breathing now. The stairwell was small enough for that. "Walk out," she said. "Down the ramp, not through the transit hub. They'll have people there by now. Down the ramp and on to Marsh. Whatever comes next is going to happen regardless, but how it happens is still a choice you can make." She didn't know if that was true. She was not a federal agent, and she did not have authority over what Reyes's people would do when they came through the door. But she knew that the alternative to the words she was saying was a physical confrontation in a concrete stairwell with a man who had a firearm and was trained to use it. And she was tired, and her forearm hurt, and she had 4 closure strips on a laceration that didn't need more stress tonight. She heard footsteps on the ramp below. Multiple sets. Reyes's voice, clear and carrying, calling out the structure entry in the flat professional language of a federal officer covering an entry. The man in the stairwell looked up at her for one more second. His jaw was set, and his eyes were doing the last calculation, the one that runs when there are no good options left and you're choosing between the degrees of bad. He put the weapon on the stair and stepped back from it. She sat on the hood of her car on level 3 of the Marsh Street structure and let Reyes's people do their work around her. An officer had retrieved the weapon from the stairwell. The man, his name, she learned over the next 20 minutes, was Garrett Wills, 11 years in a federal protection unit, the last 3 of which had been spent building relationships with the network that Marcus Holt had been trying to dismantle, was in the back of a federal vehicle on the street below with 2 agents and a set of charges that Reyes described, in the kind of voice she used for things that were finally landing where they belonged, as extensive. A paramedic had come up to level 3 because Reyes had sent one, and Lena hadn't been able to argue with it from a position of any authority. He checked the closure strips on her forearm, confirmed they were holding, and told her the laceration had done well for something she'd dressed in a supply corridor. She thanked him. He looked at her face and at the general condition of a person who had been awake for what was, at this point, approaching 22 hours, and asked if she needed anything else. "No," she said. He went back down the ramp. Reyes came and stood beside her car. She looked like she'd looked at the beginning of the night, composed, clipped, moving between tasks with the economy of someone who would sleep when the list was done and not before. But there was something slightly different in how she stood, something that wasn't quite ease but was closer to it than the previous several hours had been. "He's talking," Reyes said. "Already?" The kind of talk that happens when someone runs the math and decides the best available outcome involves cooperation. She looked out at the structure, at the vehicles, at the city visible through the open side of level 3 in the early morning dark. "He's been running assets to the network for 18 months. Access to movement schedules, safe house locations, unit personnel files." She paused. "He compromised 3 operations before Holt's. We didn't know the source until tonight." Lena said nothing for a moment. She was thinking about Marcus Holt in a federal facility somewhere, recovering from a surgery, carrying the knowledge that someone in his unit had been doing this for a year and a half. That was the kind of thing that changed how you understood the past 18 months of your own life. Rewrote it, put different meanings on moments you'd thought you understood. That was its own kind of injury. "Is Holt going to be told?" she said. "He's probably already been told." Reyes looked at her. "You want to know if he's okay?" "He's not going to be okay," Lena said. "But I want to know if he's stable." "He's stable." A pause. "He'll be moved in the morning. He wanted me to tell you." She stopped, with the same slight discomfort as before. "He said the property desk should have a personal item of his that wasn't the drive. He wants you to have it." Lena looked at her. "A coin," Reyes said. "I don't know the significance." She did. The kind of coin that got passed in the military to people who'd done something worth marking. Not official, not documented, just the economy of acknowledgement that existed outside the paperwork. She'd given a few of them in her time. She'd received 2. She didn't cry about it in the Marsh Street parking structure at 4 in the morning, but she held the information in a way that she could feel the weight of it, and that was enough. "Go home," Reyes said. "Whatever happens next starts in a few hours. You should sleep for some of them. The board meeting is at 9. "I know. I'll be there." Reyes paused. "You did good work tonight, Dawson. All of it. Not just the end." It was simply said, without emphasis or ceremony, the way Reyes said everything. Because the plainness of it was the point. Because someone who could have dressed it up choosing not to was the thing that made it mean something. "Thank you," Lena said. She drove home in the early morning and slept for 4 hours and 40 minutes, which was not enough, and was what she had. The board meeting was in the 3rd-floor conference room that normally hosted budget reviews and credentialing decisions, a room that had the specific institutional neutrality of spaces designed to make hard conversations feel procedural. There were 9 people at the table when Lena arrived at 8:58, 4 board members, Okafor, Waite, Voss, and 2 people she didn't recognize who turned out to be legal counsel, one for the hospital and one, she found out later, retained by the board's oversight committee specifically for this review. Reyes arrived at 9:04 with a federal case number and a request to address the board regarding the night's events, which she did in 12 minutes with the same clipped precision she brought to everything, covering what had happened at Harrow General, what role Lena had played, and what the federal documentation would reflect about the contributions made by hospital personnel under extraordinary conditions. She did not editorialize. She did not advocate. She stated facts, sourced them, and answered 3 questions from board members with the patience of someone who had been asked harder questions that morning. Then she sat down, and the meeting became something else. Curtis Waite spoke first, which was probably not what he'd planned, because the question came from the board chair, a woman named Dorothea Sloan, 60s. The kind of face that had seen enough versions of institutional self-protection that she'd stopped being impressed by any of them. And it was directed at Waite with the specificity of someone who had already read the documentation and was asking the question to put the answer on the record. Mr. Waite, walk me through the complaint history that preceded last night's termination. Waite had prepared for this. She could tell. There was a folder in front of him and he'd organized it, and his first 30 seconds were controlled and phrased in the language of procedure. But Sloan didn't let him stay in the procedure. She asked about specific dates. She asked about specific reports. She asked whether the counterfilings that had been made against Lena's concern reports over 4 years had been reviewed by anyone other than the attending physician whose decisions those reports identified. The answer Waite admitted was no. Voss was asked the same question about the Gerald Oates order. He answered it plainly in the way he'd answered things in the 2:30 a.m. conference room, without the armor of certainty he usually wore, which was its own kind of testimony. He acknowledged the medication flag. He acknowledged the call from Lena. He acknowledged that the order had not been independently reviewed before the hold was filed. He was asked whether, in his professional judgment, the hold Lena had filed had been clinically justified. A pause, the kind that came from someone deciding whether to protect themselves or say the accurate thing. Yes, he said. It was justified. The room was quiet for a moment. Sloan looked at the papers in front of her and then at Lena. Ms. Dawson, I'm going to tell you what this board is prepared to do, and then I'm going to ask if you have anything to say. She said it, all of it. The formal rescission of the termination, effective retroactively to the previous evening. The full audit of complaint response procedures in the emergency and surgical departments over the preceding 4 years. The review of every counterfiling made against Lena's documented concerns. The external clinical review panel that would assess the Gerald Oates order and 3 other flagged incidents that the Oversight Committee had identified in the pre-meeting review. And one more thing, a newly created position, Director of Clinical Safety and Staff Advocacy, which would carry formal authority to escalate medication concerns, conduct independent reviews of complaint response, and report directly to the board rather than through department heads. Sloan looked at her. We'd like to offer you that position. We understand if your answer is not immediate. Lena had thought, driving to the hospital this morning with 4 hours of sleep and coffee, and the particular clarity that came from having been through something large and coming out the other side of it, about what she wanted from this room. She'd thought about it the way she thought about difficult decisions. Not the outcome she wanted, but the reasons behind the outcome. What it would mean and what it would cost, and whether the cost was one she could account for. She looked at the table. At Okafor, who had been on the phone with the board at midnight and had not been doing it for himself. At Voss, who was sitting with the expression of a man who had put down a thing he'd been carrying in the wrong direction for too long. At Waite, who was not meeting her eyes and probably wouldn't for some time, which was its own kind of information about what accountability felt like from the inside of it. She thought about Amara, who had followed her instinct into a trauma bay based on nothing more than the fact that someone had asked for this specific nurse. About Prescott, who had run on stubbornness and bad coffee all night. About the woman in 408 who said she had nice hands. About Marcus Holt, who had logged a drive at an intake desk while being prepped for emergency surgery, betting that she'd still be in the building. About Gerald Oates, sleeping in a room 3 floors above her with clean vitals and a medication flag that had done its job. My answer is yes, she said. Conditional on the audit being fully independent and the results being disclosed to staff, not just the board. Sloan wrote something on the paper in front of her. Agreed. And I wanted in the formal position description that the advocacy function applies upward, meaning I can escalate concerns about any clinical staff member, regardless of seniority. Sloan looked at Voss when she wrote that one. Voss looked at the table. Agreed, Sloan said. The hallway outside the conference room was empty when the meeting ended and people filtered out in the way of meetings that have been long and heavy. Okafor stopped beside her and said simply, "Thank you." And she understood he meant all of it. Not just the night, but the 4 years of reports that had built the record that made last night's board response possible. She nodded and he went back toward his office. Voss was the last to leave the room. He came into the hallway and stopped a few feet from her, and they stood in the ordinary fluorescent light of the 3rd-floor corridor with the sounds of the hospital moving around them, carts and pages, and the distant rhythm of an institution continuing its work. And he looked like what he was, which was a 62-year-old surgeon who had just spent a morning being walked through evidence of a pattern he'd constructed, and who now had to figure out how to practice medicine in an institution where the woman he'd spent 4 years trying to push out was going to sit on the board's reporting chain. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A formal one. I'll put it in writing today." She looked at him. "A written apology goes in a file," she said. "What I'd rather have is a different kind of medicine in this building." He held that for a moment. "That takes longer than a letter." "I know," she paused. "But you're still here. So am I." He gave her a single nod that contained more in it than most people put into full sentences, and he went down the hallway toward the surgical wing, and she watched him go. Boussole. She went to see Gerald Oates at 11 in the morning. He was awake, sitting up, eating something from a hospital tray with the focused attention of a man who hadn't eaten in 24 hours and was discovering that institutional scrambled eggs were better than nothing. He looked up when she came in. "The nurse from before," he said. "Lena Dawson." She pulled the chair from the corner. "How are you feeling?" "Like I had surgery," he said, "which I gather I almost needed for a different reason." He set his fork down. "My wife told me what happened last night. She was here this morning." He looked at her. "She said a lot of things, but the main one was that you filed something that stopped a medication being given to me." "A pharmacist made the final call," she said. "I just made sure the flag was visible." "That's not what my wife said." "Your wife doesn't know what the pharmacist did." He looked at her with the expression of a man who understood that she was being accurate, and also that accuracy and the full truth were not always the same thing. "Thank you," he said, "for whatever the accurate description is." She stayed for 10 minutes. She talked to him about the recovery timeline, about what to watch for, about the follow-up appointments his chart had already scheduled. She talked to him in the plain language she'd always used with patients, not simplified but clear, because clarity was a form of respect, and she'd always believed that people deserved to understand what was happening in their own bodies. When she stood to leave, he said, "Are you going to be here? Still?" "Yes," she said. "Different role, but I'm here." He nodded. "Good," he said. "This place needs more people like you." She didn't deflect it. She just said, "Take care of yourself, Mr. Oates," and left. Amara found her in this hallway near the nursing station at noon. She had dark circles under her eyes from a night shift that had turned into a morning she hadn't planned for, and she was still in yesterday's scrubs. And she looked at Lena with the expression of someone who had been waiting to ask something and had finally found the right moment. "What did they do?" Amara said. "In there," Lena told her. "All of it. The rescission, the audit, the new position." She watched Amara's face move through several things in sequence, and the last thing it landed on was not relief or happiness exactly, but something more complicated than either. 4 years, Amara said. "Yeah. You filed 23 reports." "I know." "And it took—" Amara stopped. She looked at the floor and then back up. "It shouldn't have taken all of that." "No," Lena said. "It shouldn't have." That was the part she'd been sitting with all morning, in the board meeting and in Gerald Oates's room and in the elevator and in the quiet moments between the things that required her to be somewhere. The part that didn't get cleaned up by the resolution, that sat alongside the relief and the vindication without being dissolved by them. 23 reports over 4 years. 11 confirmed issues. 1 patient who'd nearly been given a medication that could have killed him. 1 night in which the safety of the entire hospital had depended on the presence of a person who had been escorted out of the building with a cardboard box 4 hours earlier. None of that got smaller because the ending was right. It just sat there, being the shape of what had happened. She thought about what she would do with the new position. Not the title of it, not the authority of it, but the daily practice of it. The reports she would read, the escalations she would make, the conversations she would have with nurses who were holding concerns they didn't trust the system to honor, because the system had spent a long time teaching people not to trust it. That was the work, not the vindication. The vindication was last night and this morning and was already becoming the past. The work was what came after, the specific, unglamorous, continuous act of making a place better than it was. "You should go home," Lena said to Amara. "Sleep." "I will," Amara looked at her. You should too. I have one more thing. That. The property desk was on the ground floor near the main entrance, a small office staffed by a man named Otto, who had been at Harrow General longer than most of the current medical staff. He was in his late 50s and had the organized quietness of someone whose job required him to track things carefully and who had made peace with the fact that no one noticed his work unless something went wrong. She told him her name. He looked it up without being asked, and he put a small sealed envelope on the counter. Inside was a military challenge coin, gold and black, worn smooth on one side where it had been handled many times. On the face was an insignia she recognized from Kandahar, from the unit she'd been attached to in 2014, from a specific 6-week deployment that had produced things she didn't talk about and people she still thought about at irregular intervals. On the back, someone had scratched 3 words with something sharp, not engraved, scratched, hasty. The kind of mark made by a person who wanted to leave something behind in a hurry. You held the line. She stood at the property desk for a moment, coin in her palm. Otto was doing something with his computer and not looking at her, which she appreciated. She closed her hand around it. Good. She left the hospital at 1 in the afternoon through the main entrance into an October afternoon that had finally delivered the rain it had been threatening the night before. The parking lot was wet and the air smelled like concrete and leaves and the particular cold of early fall in the Oregon hills, and she stood under the entrance canopy for a moment before walking out into it. She was 41 years old. She had come here 4 years ago with a service record and a skill set and the quiet intention to do one thing well in a place that needed it done. She'd been made to feel, in various ways and by various people over those 4 years, that what she brought was less than it was. That her questions were provocations, that her precision was aggression, that the standards she held herself to were somehow an indictment of everyone around her rather than a contribution to them. She'd filed 23 reports and held 23 lines, and she was still here. Not because the system had treated her fairly. It hadn't, and pretending otherwise was the kind of lie that helped no one. But because she'd understood from the beginning that the alternative to Stain was a department that didn't have those reports on file. A Gerald Oates who didn't have a flag in his chart, a building full of people who deserved better care than they were getting. Some fights only have someone standing in them because someone decided to stay. She walked out into the rain. It wasn't a triumphant walk. She was tired, her forearm hurt, and she was going home to sleep for 8 hours in clothes she'd been in since yesterday afternoon. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a person who had been through something large and was now on the other side of it with a new job and a coin in her pocket, and the specific kind of exhaustion that came from caring about something enough to fight for it over a long period of time. That was the truth of it. Not the cinematic version, not the moment of vindication as the final word, but the continuing version where you picked up the next day and the next report and the next patient and the next conversation with a system that was still imperfect and would remain so. And you stayed because the stain was the work. And the work was the point. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sims. Welcome back. Also, your parking spot is better now. Don't ask. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put the phone in her pocket and walked to her car in the rain, and the city of Duskfield continued around her. Ordinary and imperfect and full of people doing difficult things in buildings that didn't always deserve them. And she drove home. There were patients tomorrow. There were reports to write and a position to build, and conversations to have with nurses who had been waiting for someone with the authority to listen to them. There was work. She'd always been better at work than at waiting, and for the first time in 4 years, the work was going somewhere. That was enough. It was, in fact, more than enough. It was everything.